All right, man, peace. So current president of the United States, Donald Trump, has decided that he is going to hold a quote-unquote summit on race. And two of the most prominent figures that he has decided to invite are Mr. Colin Kaepernick, the embattled former quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, who's currently under the control of Nessa Diab, his handler, and also Mr. Kanye West, someone who has firmly fallen down the rabbit hole into the sunken place, and his handler is Kim Kardashian, as well as her mother. I believe her mother's name is Kris Jenner. Well, the reason why I definitely want to make this video is to address a myriad of topics, one of them being mockery. And brothers, I've made statements about self-awareness before. The so-called black man lacks self-awareness oftentimes because he's never been taught anything. So what this society does is it creates paragons for the so-called black man to idolize, predominantly in the entertainment industry. Why is that? Because they know as long as you're following entertainers, you'll never be a serious threat, because entertainers are not serious at all. Just because you can throw a football or dunk a basketball or rap or sing does not make you qualified to speak about race. Beyond that, all of these entertainers are bought and paid for, and the vast majority of the prominent ones are Luciferians. So basically what they do is they create control opposition through these entertainers. And that's the reason why Donald Trump is inviting Colin Kaepernick as well as Kanye West to this quote-unquote summit on race, even though neither one of them are qualified to speak about race, because both of them are confused. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Cleveland pastor Darrell Scott, an outside advisor to the White House, told People magazine Thursday that President Donald Trump is setting up a meeting with multiple athletes and music artists to discuss race. Scott said two of the people who will be invited to the summit on race will be Colin Kaepernick and Kanye West.
Now, I've made many videos in regards to this issue of having quote-unquote athletes and entertainers as leaders. That truly is a mockery of the so-called black man. That's an indictment on the so-called culture of the quote-unquote black community. That proves that we have none, because no other race has athletes and entertainers set up in prominent positions of leadership. And once again, they're being set up in leadership by the quote-unquote oppressor. Once again, an athlete and an entertainer is bought and paid for. They've been compromised already. They're never going to be able to give proper instruction on what the so-called black community can do or should do, because they know where their bread is buttered. Why would Kanye West or Colin Kaepernick or any prominent entertainer or athlete ever be able to generate the thought process to speak about the things that the so-called black community actually needs to do, when they know that they make their money and they garner their fame by gaining the acclaim of all people? That's the main issue that the so-called black man has. He's been sucked down the quote-unquote rabbit hole of Luciferianism, that being globalism. And I tell many of you brothers this all the time. When you're dealing with the liberal black woman, she has three altars, that being globalism, racialism, and feminism. She wants to hold hands with everybody. That's why they set her up to be a caretaker over the so-called black community, so that they can imbue their young sons with that same mentality. By the time the so-called black man starts to understand the game, he's about 35, 40 years old. And that's because of what he's not being taught in the home. He's not being taught to view himself as a king. He's being taught that he should want to hold hands and quote-unquote love everybody. That is why that was one of the main sentiments of Mr. Kanye West, talking about quote-unquote love. When he speaks about love, he's talking about the Bacchus, because Bacchus was the god of love and revelry and the theater. The entertainment industry, the god of the entertainment industry is Bacchus/Pan. Okay? So once again, so-called black man, you're being mocked.
Now, according to Scott, the president is 100% for and very enthusiastic.
And what's up with this chick, Molly Karam? She got the hips of a 12-year-old boy. What the hell is going on with her?
About it. The expectations are that they'll have two meetings, one at the White House early this summer, one with musicians, followed by one with athletes.
Now, did you hear that, guys? They're going to have two summits, one with musicians and one with athletes. Why is that? Because those are the two entities, the two groups that they use to control the so-called black men. Those are the two groups that they use to program you. That's why a lot of these guys get so upset with me when I talk about Kobe Bryant or Allen Iverson, because those television figures have become surrogate dads to the so-called black community. I have these guys coming on my channel talking about Allen Iverson. He showed the black man to be who he wants to be. No, he didn't. Allen Iverson was an agent of chaos. You should be happy that that brother's alive. He's dysfunctional. And he'll tell you that himself. When the blind lead the blind, they're both going to fall into the ditch. So many of you brothers have to understand that. Allen Iverson is not a leader. He never was a leader. And if you watch any biographies, any television shows, any documentaries on Allen Iverson, he will tell you that himself. He will tell you that he was a fuck up. And thankfully, Reebok created that trust fund for Allen Iverson. Because if it was not for that, he would be a cautionary tale today. I got guys coming on here talking about, oh, well, you know, Allen Iverson, you know, they took away footage where he crossed over Jordan and put him on one knee, and the NBA was scared that Allen Iverson was going to surpass Jordan, blah, blah, blah. Like, what are you talking about, man? Michael Jordan's last 2 years with the Bulls won 67 and 62 games. The Philadelphia 76ers were not a threat to anybody. They were not even a playoff team. Like, what are you talking about? The so-called black man has to get his head out of these various athletes' asses, man. You have to stop idolizing these athletes. They're entertainers. And most of them, their history, their biographies are contrived. Many of them are program multiples. But that's neither here nor there. Point being is this, so-called black man. When they're having a summit on race, and the most notable so-called black figures that Donald Trump decides to invite are athletes and entertainers, what are they really telling you? Look at Molly Karam's face when she made that statement. She's making a face like, wow, that truly is mockery. I bet you that she understands it at a far higher level than a lot of liberal blacks do. And the reason why I make that distinction is because liberal black people love to argue. They love to bicker about shit they don't even understand. That is one of the notable trademarks of a liberal black. They think that just because they have a mouth, they should use it. Oftentimes your mouth can be your own worst enemy because you're saying things that you have no comprehension of. So-called black people need to listen more. Let me specify, liberal blacks need to listen more. Because there are a lot of intelligent brothers out there who actually want to learn. But so many of our people just want to run their mouth, and they act as a detriment. That's why I tell many of you brothers out there, know who it is that is actually useful in your life. And when people are not useful, remove them immediately. Immediately. In any way, shape, or form, in whatever circle that you're generating, remove them. If it's in social media, somebody's being negative, remove them. If it's in your personal life, remove them. People are either positive or negative. There are very, very few neutral people that you will encounter in your personal life. When people are negative, remove them. They're not necessary.
Stephen A., what's your reaction to this?
Well, my reaction to it is that I don't have a problem with it from this perspective. Some folks have called the president inarticulate. Others have, maligned his behavior. I've been one that has had an issue with his behavior because I think the presidency is about statesmanship just as much as it is about anything else.
No, actually, it's not Stephen A. Smith. Actually, what the presidency is about is acting as the director of your own department within the global corporation. That's all it is. And you have to report to the CEO or whoever your head is intermittently to let them understand that you're doing your job. If you're not doing your job, you're going to be removed. What is the job of the president, quote unquote, is to make sure that the hirelings, that being the quote unquote citizens of the United States, are doing their due diligence to maximize their monetization. Because we're only viewed as financial assets. That's it. Period. That is why no real culture is taught in this society. Everything is colorism. And so many so-called black people fall down that rabbit hole of colorism. I did a video on 2 so-called Native American men who allegedly were victims of racial prejudice at Colorado State University. And the video was about how that truly was a cover story for their attempt to utilize the energy of Satanism to graft themselves into the entertainment industry. And so many so-called black people are more caught up in the notion that they're not real Native Americans rather than what the issue is really about. When you're comfortable and secure with who you are, you don't have to bicker about shit that everybody already knows. Okay? Beyond that, the original so-called black people of America are Aboriginal. They're not Native American. The Native Americans are the Mongoloids. The real story is how people are trying to utilize Luciferianism to exalt themselves. And that was the case in that story, and it's also the case in this story right here. Stephen A. Smith is one of the agents of chaos that they utilize in the entertainment industry to try to exalt quote unquote athletes and entertainers as viable options for leadership, because that's where his bread is buttered. He's invited to do many speaking engagements where he gives out leadership advice and things of that nature. All he is a sports writer.
But I'll let history, and I'll let and people far more knowledgeable than me record his actions from a policy perspective and judge him accordingly. That's not our place on this show. I will say, however, if you are POTUS, if you are President of the United States of America, you are in position to have a profound impact on race relations in this country and beyond, presently and moving forward. And anytime there's a discussion about race, I certainly welcome the president, regardless of who he may be or she may be, to be involved in that process. So I don't have.
How could you have a discussion or a conversation about race when 99% of so-called black people in this society do not even know what the term race means? The term race literally means your seed line. It has nothing to do with color, much less skin color. So already, when people decide that they're going to have a conversation on race and they call themselves black and they call someone else white, the conversation will lead nowhere. That's why I tell certain Caucasians who come onto my channel and try to utilize the same hackneyed tactics of attention mongering that this channel was not for the circular racial conversation. It's very important that the so-called black man be able to concentrate on what's relevant and what's important, as opposed to these little silly diatribes that people try to levy against him to distract him from what is really important.
So I don't have a problem with it from that perspective. I certainly don't have a problem with it in regards to Colin Kaepernick, because considering the positions that he's taken, the stance that he's embraced, regardless of the ultimate consequences that he's facing as we speak, as far as I'm concerned, I definitely believe and endorse him being a part of that summit. Kanye West.
Now, why would Colin Kaepernick want to be a part of a race summit when he has shown no ability to articulate what his viewpoints actually are on quote-unquote race? He stated that he's against quote-unquote police brutality against so-called blacks, something that he's never experienced a day in his life. Actually, he's been the beneficiary of his exalted title of professional athlete when Tiana Taylor accused him of being involved in a sexual assault against her about 4 or 5 years ago. And that story just went away. Colin Kaepernick was raised by Caucasians. He knows nothing about the so-called black experience other than being a member of that homosexual cult known as the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, allegedly homosexual cult, but it is what it is, or I should say pansexual cult.
Is an entirely different matter. And before I get to my point about Kanye West, what I would like to do is re-air what he said to TMZ in their studio just days ago. Could y'all play that for me, please?
You hear about slavery for 400 years? For 400 years? That sounds like a choice. Like, you was there for 400 years and it's all of y'all?
That is the most ignorant thing that I've ever heard come out of the mouth of an African American. It is disgraceful. It is abhorrent. It's repulsive. It's an insult to our ancestors. What this man said, to state matter-of-factly that ancestors who were raped, maimed, murdered, that was by choice.
Well, let me say this first off, and I've already covered this in the series that I did on Kanye West. No, what he stated was not an insult, because it is a fact that many so-called blacks actually did want to stay in that station of quote-unquote slavery. Many of them did. And Harriet Tubman testified to that. And this is what amazes me. People can get so upset at Kanye West for making a statement that he made. But once again, Harriet Tubman stated, or at least this is the quote attributed to her, that of all the people that she quote-unquote freed, she could have freed more if she could have gotten them to realize that they were slaves. That's what she said. She made that statement. But when Kanye West makes the same statement, he's the worst guy in the world, he's Kanye, he's this and he's that. So many so-called black people are posers. They're racial posers. And that's why I always get on the pro-blacks, because they're full of shit. 95% of them are full of shit. Now you have the other 5% who are actually legitimately looking for answers. But 95% of so-called pro-blacks and liberal blacks are full of nothing but shit. Every last one of them. Okay? Now you have that small portion that are actually trying to find truth. That's why I call this a pro-truth channel. It's not a pro-black channel. Because pro-blacks want to go back and forth in the circular race talk, and most of them don't know anything about their own history. They just talk shit all day. Now the fact of the matter is that even in the Caucasian man's conventional history on quote-unquote slavery, the first quote-unquote slaves, so-called slaves, arrived in America in 1619. Now from 1619 to 1865 is not 400 years. That's number one. Number two, the person who turned the concept of slavery into chattel slavery was a so-called black slave owner by the name of Anthony Johnson. So-called blacks owned slaves. They owned so-called black slaves. They also owned so-called white slaves. They also had indentured servitude. But the concept of chattel slavery was implemented after a so-called black slave owner by the name of Anthony Johnson initiated it, because he wanted to make sure that one of his so-called indentured servants whose time was up, he served his 7 years, was trying to go free, and he took the case to court and was able to maintain him for life. One of the reasons why they hide that aspect is because they don't want people to know and understand that so-called blacks of the Americas predominantly came over here from the British Isles and from Europe. A large contingent of so-called blacks that are in America today are the descendants of the original blacks from the British Isles and all of Europe. As I've stated incessantly on this channel, so-called black people come from three different demographics. The so-called blacks from Europe, the aboriginal blacks of America, and the so-called blacks that were brought in from the west coast of Africa. Stephen A. Smith calls Kanye West ignorant. I guarantee you, he does not know anything about his own history, Stephen A. Smith. He's just another nigga talking.
Is one of, if not the greatest insult to black people that I have ever heard come out of the mouth of a black person. I'm ashamed of Kanye West and what he said. And I want to take this moment to applaud that kid. I believe his name is Lathan for TMZ.
Yes, another liberal black who, when he's not flipping out over Kanye West, is talking about how he has a teen white girl list. That guy Van Lathan, that's normally how liberal blacks are. They really get upset with other black people for making them look bad in front of the Caucasian. They like to vacillate between globalism and racialism. Once again, most pro-blacks / liberal blacks ain't shit. They ain't worth the feet that they're walking on. People can get mad at that if they want to. I don't give a damn. They're not consistent. And once again, 95% of pro-blacks, they just want a hug from the Caucasian man. They're not into the truth. They just talk shit all damn day.
Who came back and responded to Kanye West in such an eloquent and brilliant way that it forced Kanye West to go over to him and apologize.
No, he did not apologize to him. He went over to him to give him what he knew he needed, which was a hug. See, Kanye West was really mocking Van Lathan. He was mocking the mentality of the liberal black. That's why he even mentioned liberals in one of his spiels while he was being interviewed by TMZ. The reason why he walked over to Van Lathan and he said, "I have a feeling like you wanna fight me." The reason why he was saying that is because he knows the liberal black is emotionally unstable. Once again, so-called black man, you cannot always default to emotionalism whenever people say things that you don't like. We have to up our knowledge. We have to up our information intake so that we don't always fall prey to every trick and every form of chicanery. The reason why Kanye West walked over to Van Lathan and offered him a hug is because he knows that liberal blacks need emotional support. As broken psychologically as Kanye West is, he understands the liberal black very well.
He was absolutely right.
And as you can see here, Kanye has the honey blonde for Hippocrates. He's wearing all black and he has the honey blonde. That is his altar of chaos.
In every word that he uttered, in the tenor that he did in expressing it, not...
Now look at Kanye West's shirt here. You see that he has the mother goddess on his shirt. One of the hand signs there is the quote-unquote Manu Cornuto.
Not to mention the fact that he also told Kanye, "I don't need your apology, I don't need your hug, I need you to be more responsible with the ignorant rhetoric that's coming out of his mouth." I don't know what has happened to Kanye West. I don't know what is wrong with this brother, but what...
Well, I know what's wrong with him. He's under mind control. But you're under mind control too, Stephen A. Smith. You know that. ESPN controls you. Now, they may not have the level of control over you that Kim Kardashian and Kris Jenner have over Kanye, but they control you. You could be making millions on your own platform, but you're scared to leave that plantation. Why is that?
But what he said was so incredibly insulting to African Americans and black people the world over.
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, so-called black people need to be upset. They need to have things told to them that make them upset. Because a lot of our people have to come out of that low-level understanding that they love so much. A lot of our people are full of shit. I'm going to say it again. They love talking about race this and race that, but really what they want is to come together with the Caucasian because they want the Caucasian's love so that they can feel validated as a human being. That's why people keep talking about quote-unquote equality. What that really means is, white man, if you recognize me as an equal, now I'll feel like a man. As opposed to saying that I want my own. See, Kanye West, for all of his rabble and a lot of his strange soliloquies, he has more of a ruling class mentality, even though he's stuck down that rabbit hole in the sunken place. He's farther ahead than a lot of regular Negroes. Ain't that a bitch?
That the ultimate emotion that rakes through my soul is sadness. Sadness that this brother would feel the need to say what he said. He has no business being a part of any kind of race summit whatsoever.
Yes, the reason why you feel like he does not have any business being a part of a race summit is because you don't believe that he's going to be able to put forth the sentiment that you want to be put forth at that racial summit, which is circular race talk that will lead nowhere. Nowhere. You want the so-called white man to apologize to you for things that many of them had nothing to do with. The vast majority of Caucasians in this society are the descendants of white trash. That is a fact. You so-called black people put them on a pedestal and you want to make them all slave owners in perpetuity. That's what many of you do. Most of these Caucasians in America came over to the United States in the late 1800s going into the 1900s, believe it or not. Many of them did. And of the Caucasians that were in America prior to that, only about 8 to 10% of them even had the monetary capabilities to own quote-unquote slaves. And by percentage, there were more free blacks that owned so-called black slaves than Caucasians. That's a fact. So at the end of the day, what the so-called black man needs to be focused on is being a king and trying to raise up his level of understanding and grasping real history, not narrative, real history. Because the victim mentality is not going to get you anywhere. Nobody's going to give the so-called black man anything. And once again, so-called blacks love talking about the Caucasian Jew and why they got reimbursed. They get reparations and they get reimbursed because they own the banks. They pay themselves. Okay? Our people need to stop always looking to the Caucasian to solve our problems. We look at the Caucasian like he is a proverbial father. That's why he has no respect for us. I hope that you understand that. The only way that you get respect as a man is when you define yourself. That's it. All this other shit, this begging and carrying on, is never going to work. That's why the so-called black community has been in a state of stasis for the last however many decades. And until our people realize that, we're going to be stuck on that hamster wheel.
Donald Trump, he's the president. Colin Kaepernick, his work and his words and his efforts speak for itself, no matter.
Yes, they speak for themselves. He's done nothing. What words? He has not said anything. What works? Because he's given away some old clothes to some brothers that got out the pen? Good job. Because he's went around to various schools in New York City giving away book bags? He's not doing anything. The only true benefit that any so-called black man will have to himself and to his children is to be able to teach them who they are and what they need to do. Number one, the so-called black man needs to be focused on being his own boss. Corporate America is not for the so-called black man. That's number one. So you should be trying to develop your own career. Number two, you need to understand what type of female you should be impregnating. That's number two. A lot of cats get these scalawags pregnant and then want to complain when she conducts herself like a scalawag. She was that before you met her. She was that while she was with you. So why are you surprised that she's that after she gives birth to your child? Sorry, but you made a bad mistake when you decided to inseminate that broad. Period. Those are the two main things that the so-called black man needs to work on. Stop worrying about trying to make other people change around you. They're not going to change around you when they're benefiting from your dysfunction. Why would people change what's working for them?
No matter what you agree with or disagree, Kanye West needs prayer. He needs help. I don't know where from or who should provide it, but clearly he is not the individual that should be a part of this race summit.
Well, I think that you've made it very clear that you don't know much of anything, Stephen A. Smith. Oftentimes when people say that someone needs prayer, that's their way of saying, I don't agree with them. What they said made me feel bad, so I'm going to try to act like I'm taking the moral high ground in this conversation and try to evoke the name of the Most High or whatever deity I think I believe in because they need celestial support so that they could think like me. No, sir, it doesn't work like that. Once again, Kanye West made a very clunky statement. Really, all he did was repeat what Harriet Tubman said, and niggas got mad about that. Why is that? Because deep down, they know they want a hug from the white man.
That's all I have to say about it.
I'm going to address those exact points. In the first place, if Kanye West's comments on race are disqualifying in terms of his participation in a race summit, then Donald Trump's certainly have been. Donald Trump ran on white ethnocentrism, really, on white ethno-nationalism.
Well, actually, what Donald Trump ran on is that he was going to be contrary to Barack Obama. That's why he attacked Barack Obama. And if he ran on white ethnocentrism, well, that's his prerogative. He's a Caucasian man. I find it refreshing that there was a so-called presidential candidate that was not going to try to act like he cared about me, because I already know that he doesn't. Barack Obama tried to act like he cared about me. I knew that he didn't. And as soon as he got into the White House, you saw what he was really all about, which was empowering homosexuals, lesbians, pansexuals, and transgenders. That's all he was ever about. So at least with Donald Trump, I know where I stand.
And in fact, you can see that racial resentment among white people was the best predictor of a vote for Donald Trump.
Well, I think that incompetence from Hillary Clinton was also the best predictor.
So you have to ask yourself, is the person calling this summit an honest broker, or are they rather engaging in a cynical political maneuver?
Well, you can't have it both ways, sir. You can't say that Donald Trump ran on white ethnocentricity, but then say that he's trying to engage in a racial summit out of cynicism. Because if he ran on white ethnocentricity, he would not care to have a race summit, because so-called blacks are not a threat to him at all. At all.
I would say the latter pretty clearly. Then the question is, should someone like Kaepernick even involve himself and thereby legitimize some race summit, which is actually, I believe, a cynical political maneuver?
Well, of course you believe that, because you're a liberal Caucasian Jew. Your type are who are controlling Colin Kaepernick and Kanye West, for that matter, but particularly Kaepernick. Kaepernick is being controlled by Marxist Caucasian Jews, super liberals like Max Kellerman, who would advise him to not show up for Donald Trump. They're the same entity that are advising Kaepernick to not make any statements whatsoever, so that he can create this martyr aura about him, like he's hidden in the shadows, like V for Vendetta.
And I would say no, Kaepernick shouldn't, because Kaepernick seems to be an honest broker.
Is he? What has he been honest about thus far? Oh, well, the police don't treat black people well. Has he been honest about that, or has he just been a regurgitator? And notice how his image has been fostered for him. He went into hiding and came out with a huge afro, wearing all black, a black leather jacket, trying to conjure the energy of Huey P. Newton. Why is he doing that? Obviously, he's being prepped. Why is he constantly being compared to notable so-called black figures in athletics who are associated with standing up for race, like Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali? Who's doing that for him? He's not doing it because he's not talking. So clearly he has handlers that are trying to foster an image for him.
Now to Kanye West. Stephen A., Kanye West is not an intellectual. He is not.
Well, neither are you, sir. So you have something in common with him.
He has not been rigorously formally educated, nor is he.
Well, that's not what makes an intellectual. Being an intellectual is not based on how, quote unquote, educated you are. Education is just indoctrination. That's just your ability to regurgitate what someone else believes. That's truly all conventional education is. An intellect is somebody who can create their own thoughts. It's based on your comprehension abilities. It's not based on your education.
is he, if he is a deep thinker, then that he is not able to articulate it.
Well, that's a better point. Kanye West has issues with articulation. He has trouble putting forth his point. He tells you that himself. As a matter of fact, he told you that in the TMZ interview, that he's an artist. He's someone who makes statements that he really does not understand why he makes. And I give him credit for acknowledging that. That once again is the reason why a race summit should not be attended by athletes and entertainers, because they're given a spotlight that they really can't handle. Your job when the spotlight is on you is to entertain me, not to tell me about society. I don't want to hear your thoughts about society, because for the most part, you're not an administrator. Artists, for the most part, do not have administrative abilities. They don't have legislative abilities. They don't understand the importance of judgment. They don't grasp that. They just want to create. They're very willy-nilly. So let them do what they do best. Once again, the reason why they're being invited to a quote-unquote race summit is to mock the so-called black man and the lack of leadership in the so-called black community. That's the real reason why that's going on. Okay? That's why that's happening. It has nothing to do with cynicism from quote-unquote Donald Trump. It's so that he can actually utilize them and once again reinforce the image of the black athlete, black entertainer, really the quote-unquote black minstrel, as the person that the so-called black community should look for inspiration and leadership. And they basically act as proxy leaders. That's their job, and that's it. Because they've been bought and paid for. Once again, they've been compromised. So when they get their fame and their money from the system, they're never going to be able to generate thoughts that are going to take down this system. They're not mentally or spiritually equipped to do so. But anyway, we're going to continue this on part 2. Peace.